in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This Honorable Senate now resumes its sittings, and before we proceed with the day's business, I wish first of all to apologize to our visitors for the late start. We have a number of kids with us today from the Praise Tabernacle Christian Academy. There are 54 students and 2 teachers, and I wish to welcome you to the Senate this morning. I was admiring teachers, I was admiring the students, how well put together they were, young men with their ties and the ladies in their nice skirts. And I think that it is important, an important aspect of the discipline for you to be turned out. So I compliment the teachers on the turnout of your students. Please remember that this is your Senate. Garden House belongs to you as Jamaicans, and you're always welcome to come here to view the Senate and to participate in the democratic process. I'm sorry to keep you all waiting again so long today, because when I came here at 9 o'clock, most of you guys were already here. So we apologize for that, and I hope that notwithstanding the late start, you will enjoy the sitting today. So once again, welcome students and teachers of the Praise Tabernacle Christian Academy. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following: ministry papers number 50 and the order resolution 2018. The law reform zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Mount Salem community and environs in the parish of St. James zone, extension of period of operations number 3, order 2018, and the order resolution. Under the law reform zones of special operations, special security and community development measures act 2017. Annual report of the Consumer Affairs Commission for the year 2016-2017. Annual report of the Fair Trading Commission for the year 2012 to 2013 and 2013 to 2014. Annual report on audited financial statements of the Transport Authority for the year 2016 to 2017. And Jamaica Logistics Hub Initiative Market Analysis and Master Plan and Implementation Strategy for the Global Logistic Hub Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. Bills brought from the Honorable House of Representatives, petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally, questions and answers to questions, motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to the sitting of the Senate, motions for leave to introduce bills, the presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained, public business. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is intended today to take the act to amend the Public Procurement Act, and it is intended to take it through all its stages. Mr. President, The act before us today, the bill before us today, was tabled in this Honourable House on June 1, 2018. And it is my honour to present its terms to the Senate today. Mr. President, public procurement can and in fact does have a major impact on Jamaica's economy. This is not a matter that should be taken lightly. Government procurement accounts for a substantial part of the global economy at 10 to 20% of GDP globally. In Jamaica's case, public procurement is estimated at an even higher percentage, at 30% of GDP. And this shows how important the issue is to this nation. So we must ensure that the process is a fair and transparent one, a transparent process in the use of taxpayers' money, because this is, in fact, big business, and it is the Jamaican people's business. Mr. President, public procurement can no longer be treated as a routine clerical function within a ministry or department. Today's procurement environment is anything but routine. It requires an understanding of dynamic markets, ever-changing technologies, and modern purchasing methods. Furthermore, in addition to national regulatory requirements, we have to ensure compliance with international obligations in trade, labor, the environment, and in the mitigation of corruption. Further still, Jamaica needs a public procurement regime that embodies the fundamental principles for any regime to be successful, including competition, efficiency, equity, fairness, transparency, and of course, last but certainly not least, value for money. Today, we're taking a big step towards fine-tuning and cementing this regime. Mr. President, you will recall that the Public Procurement Act 2015 was a major achievement and a major step forward in reforming the public procurement regime in Jamaica. That regime seeks to catalyze economic growth, enhance the potential for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises to compete for Government of Jamaica contracts, increase the efficiency of government in delivering timely services, as well as increase the public's confidence, and to harmonize documentation and allow for electronic submission of bids. There have, however, been challenges in attaining all of these objectives. The amendments proposed today, together with the regulations, will get us closer to effective implementation of a new procurement regime. Before I get to the clause by clause, however, Mr. President, there are just a few points I wish to touch on, starting with the regulations. Mr. President, the Public Procurement Act is supported by 3 sets of regulations. Firstly, the Public Procurement Regulations 2018, which contains provisions that will ensure the efficient and effective management of the procurement function so that Jamaica is obtaining best value for money. Secondly, the Public Procurement Reconsideration and Review Regulations 2018 will provide details on avenues for redress. Under these regulations, the Procurement Review Board will be empowered to take timely actions, and let me emphasize timely actions, and decisions that arise from queries and disputes. And thirdly, Mr. President, the Public Procurement Registration and Classification of Suppliers Regulations 2018, those have not yet been tabled because they require the Public Procurement Commission under the Act to be operational first. So this Act today has to be passed before those regulations are tabled. But these regulations will address the registration and classification of suppliers, as well as strengthen and expand the functions of the Commission as an independent body. Mr. President, we can all agree as well that changing the public procurement landscape requires proper implementation. In this regard, the government is partnering with the Management Institute for National Development to put in place a sustainable program for capacity strengthening. In fact, 20 public officials are currently being instructed as trainers for the rollout of the public procurement training program across the public sector. Additionally, the Ministry of Finance is far advanced in implementing the electronic procurement platform. To date, 89 procuring entities have been trained in its functionalities, and 29 are already using the platform to execute procurement contracts. Notably, approximately 1,000 suppliers are registered on the platform, and 264 Jamaican suppliers have been trained by the ministry. Turning to the bill itself, Mr. President, the decision to amend the Public Procurement Act 2015 came about as a result of challenges acknowledged or recognized while drafting the supporting regulations, the Public Procurement Manual, and the standard bidding documents. While most of the amendments are to correct language, to clarify, and reference errors, there were one or two policy matters that also had to be revisited. For example, a second look was given to the provisions related to special and differential treatment measures. These are measures which are given special consideration to a class of suppliers and necessarily target a group of suppliers. Internationally, they're used to protect vulnerable groups such as youth, women, MSMEs, and to build special industries through aligning the current policy on offsets with that of the WTO's concept of special and differential treatment measures, which in fact encapsulates offsets, domestic margins of preference, and set-asides as measures that can be applied in procurement, in public procurement. How they were treated in the bill was actually dissonant with the internationally accepted concept. Mr. President, the bill before us seeks, in sum, to add or revise definitions, to clarify the role of the Office of Public Procurement Policy, to distinguish the approved registered supplier from the approved unregistered supplier, to clarify the responsibility of the heads of a procuring entity regarding its specialist procurement units, to include additional circumstances in which it will be possible to use public procurement methods to increase efficiency of the procurement function, again ensuring that we get best value for money, to make clear distinctions between eligibility, that is, the bidder being required to demonstrate proof of tax compliance and appropriate registration, as opposed to qualification, the bidder in these circumstances showing ability and capacity to fulfill the requirements of the specific procurement opportunity, and importantly, so that the standstill period is applicable to Tier 1 contracts, and that's the category that's most accessible by MSMEs. So this will ensure that MSMEs will now be able to seek review and reconsideration of procurement decisions. Mr. President, I'll move directly to a clause-by-clause review of the bill. Clause 1 addresses all the preliminary issues, and Clause 2 amends Section 2 of the Act by including new definitions as well as revising some existing definitions. In particular, new definitions include terms such as approved registered suppliers, closed framework agreements, special and differential treatment measures, set-asides, domestic margins of preference, domestic content, and eligible bidders. Of note, it was considered important to include a definition for closed framework agreement, as the Act had defined open framework agreement, but not the converse. Similarly, approved registered suppliers was not defined, but approved unregistered suppliers was already defined in the Act. There are amendments to the definitions of bid security and suppliers, international competitive bidding, invitation to bid, national competitive bidding, open bidding, and single source procurement. And as was alluded to earlier, the definition for offsets is being amended as the original definitions covered other special and differential treatment measures as falling under the heading of offsets. For example, original definition identified margin of preference and set-aside as being types of offsets, but this is not how they're treated internationally. Offsets, set-asides, and margins of preference are in fact all subsets of special and differential treatment measures. So that's a more appropriate term, and the amendment is now being made to reconcile how the definitions are treated. In respect of definitions, Mr. President, the final one to note is that the definition of suppliers is being expanded to include all types of suppliers, and the subsets are dealt with accordingly. Mr. President, Clause 3 amends Section 5, Paragraph G of the Principal Act by deleting the words "and approved registered suppliers," as the word suppliers under the new definition now captures all categories of suppliers. Importantly also, Section 5I is being amended to insert the word micro, which was inadvertently omitted in the last bill, and one would admit that it's important to ensure that we are in fact recognizing micro, small, medium, small and medium enterprises in the framework of the bill. Clause 4 amends Section 7.1 of the Act to empower the Office of Public Procurement Policy to review and make recommendations for the establishment of framework agreements for procuring entities and for any modifications which may be necessary. And this is done by inserting a new paragraph N. Additionally, Mr. President, Section 7.1c of the Act is being amended by inserting the words, and I quote, including the application of special and differential treatment measures. This insertion will allow for the office to provide for administrative guidance in relation to special and differential treatment measures, some of which would be new to public procurement in Jamaica. Clause 5 of the bill amends Sections 11.1c and 11.1d by replacing the word suppliers with the words approved registered suppliers. Additionally, the Principal Act provided for the establishment of a register of suppliers, classified in tiers according to expertise, but what is actually required is the establishment of a register of approved suppliers, classified in like manner. Clause 5 seeks to correct this by amending Section 11.1e. Clauses 6, 7, and 8, respectively, Mr. President, amend Sections 15, 1A, Section 16, and Section 18.2 by again replacing the word supplier with the words approved registered supplier. These amendments distinguish the supplier who is registered with the Public Procurement Commission and the ones who are not, but are still suppliers of goods and services. It is to be noted that Clause 7 also amends the marginal note at Section 16 of the Act. Mr. President, Clause 9 of the bill amends Section 20 of the Act by deleting the words develop and inserting the words develop and provide to the office a copy of the approved, so that the paragraph will now read develop and provide to the office a copy of the approved annual procurement plan for the procurement entity. And this is to make it clear that the office only requires the procuring entities to provide a copy of their annual procurement plan and not the original. So this is something to allow for the practical efficiency or efficacy rather of the provisions before. Mr. President, Clause 10 amends Section 21.2 of the Act by replacing the words administrative guidance with the words such administration guidance as may be, capturing the discretion of the Office of Public Procurement Policy to issue administrative guidance if it is required to procuring entities in the management of procurement committees. Mr. President, Clause 11 of the bill amends Section 23 by deleting subsection 5, as it was felt that the language therein was contradictory and uncertain, and noting, of course, as well, that the issue of Jamaican bidders was already addressed in Section 31.2. In essence, Mr. President, Section 31 as a whole provides for the protection of bidders who are Jamaican, as well as protection that will be afforded through special and differential treatment measures. So together with the new definition proposed in the bill and the provisions of the regulations, that matter will be properly and more clearly addressed on the passage of this bill. Mr. President, Clause 12 amends Section 24.2a by substituting the words as many suppliers as possible for the words all known suppliers, so that the section which deals with restrictive bidding is a little more limiting. And that paragraph is being further amended to insert the word competitively to make it clear that an invitation will be extended to as many suppliers as possible, but who are capable of supplying competitively the goods, works, or services which may be the subject of the particular procurement opportunity. Clause 13, Mr. President, amends Section 25 of the Act by inserting a new paragraph which provides for another circumstance in which it will be possible to use the single source procurement method. The circumstance would be where the time and cost involved in considering a large number of bids would be disproportionate to the estimated value of the procurement. Section 25 is also being amended by deleting the words or approved unregistered supplier, So again, this amendment deals with the efficacy of the bill, of the regulations and the act itself, allowing the process to move in a pragmatic way. Mr. President, Clause 14 seeks to provide some clarity in relation to the management of procurement methods. It therefore further amends Section 25 by including new sections 25A to 25G. Sections 25A to E describe the processes which may be employed under the specific methods of procurement. Section 25F provides that a procuring entity may engage in procurement under an open framework agreement or a closed framework agreement in accordance with prescribed procedures. Notably, at 25B, where a procuring entity engages in procurement by means of open bidding, it may be conducted in a single stage or in 2 stages. Importantly, 25G prohibits the splintering of a single procurement into separate procurements to avoid the threshold requirements or approval limits under the Act. Heads of procurement entities are required to ensure that this does not occur, Mr. President, and this is a serious issue. The splintering of single procurement into separate procurement is now expressly prohibited here. Mr. President, Clause 15 of the bill amends Section 31 of the Act as a result of the amendments to Section 25. So consequential amendments here. Reference to 24(1)B is also being inserted for coherence. Clause 15 also amends the Principal Act by inserting a new Section 31(4), which provides that a procuring entity may apply to a procurement proceeding any special and differential treatment measure as may be prescribed. So this is to ensure, again, that the special treatment that I described earlier, Mr. President, where it may be required to either protect a particular industry or to empower a particular segment of supplier, such as MSMEs or young people or women, that they may be prescribed in the regulations. Mr. President, Clause 16 amends Section 32 of the Act to clarify that the section concerns the eligibility requirements of the suppliers and not qualification. Clause 17 of the bill amends Section 38(2)B of the Act by substituting the more encompassing phrase, applicable special and differential treatment measures, instead of the word offset. Clause 18 amends 44(4) of the Act by deleting paragraph B, which states that the standstill period is not required for the award of procurement contracts where the price is less than the Tier 1 limit. It was felt, Mr. President, that this provision was unfair to smaller bidders, and this chamber may recall that the standstill period is a period which is declared after the determination of a successful bid and before the award of the contract. That during this period, bidders are allowed to query the procuring entity's decision and to award a procurement contract. So, Mr. President, this amendment is intended to add the protection that is being given to larger bidders to the smaller bidders as well, consistent with our desire to ensure that MSMEs are in fact empowered under the procurement provisions. Mr. President, Clause 19 amends the heading of Part 6 of the Act by deleting the word appeal, as the use of the word does not accurately reflect the contents of the provision. And Clause 20 amends Section 51 of the Act by deleting subsection 2, as well as other consequential amendments. Mr. President, and I'll just make the point there that this adjustment was made to make it clear that it's an aggrieved party that has the right to query a decision. Mr. President, Clause 21 amends Section 53 by deleting the reference to Section 51(3). 51(2) was just deleted, as I mentioned, under Clause 20. So now the old reference would be incorrect. And Mr. President, Clause 22 amends Section 61E by replacing the words offset with special and differential treatment measures, again to appropriately use the broader term. Clause 23 amends 61 of the Act by deleting the words or approved unregistered supplier wherever they appear, again as the word supplier already captures the subcategories of suppliers. 61(1)B is also being revised. Mr. President, Clause 24 of the bill outlines a number of consequential amendments and replaces Section 55 with a new Section 55, repealing the National Contracts Commission's Interim Provisions Act 2017 and inserts a new clause 66 and renumbers, of course, the old 66 as the new 67. Mr. President, the amendment of Section 19B of the Financial Administration and Audit Act is to harmonize the provisions of that section with the new Public Procurement Act. This one was an amendment which was effected by Section 55 of the Principal Act and specified in the 4th schedule of the Act, which has been deleted and replaced by the new Section 65 noted previously. Mr. President, Clause 24 further provides a new Section 66, subsection 2 and 3, which respectively revokes the Financial Administration Supplies Regulations 1963 and the Public Sector Procurement Regulations 2008. These latter two subsections have been moved from the original Section 66, which is now renumbered 67, and do not represent any substantive change to the section. Notably, the Public Sector Procurement Regulations 2008 is also revoked. The Public Procurement Act and the 3 regulations will cover the legislation, will together cover the legislation governing public procurement. Mr. President, Clause 25 of the bill amends Section 66 of the Principal Act, now renumbered as 67, by changing the marginal note, renumbering sections, and changing, of course, the error that is there, the words commended to commenced. Also, Section 67 as renumbered is amended by inserting after subsection 4, paragraph B and C, which references the National Contracts Commission, Interim Provisions Act 2017. Mr. President, Clause 26 of the bill amends the 1st schedule of the Act in paragraph 1A of Part A by deleting the words which are incorrectly stated, donated by the government of Jamaica, and replacing them with the exact opposite, which is the words donated to the government of Jamaica by. The heading of Part B of the 1st schedule is also amended. Clause 27 of the bill, Mr. President, amends paragraph 1, sub 2, subpara C of the 2nd schedule of the Act by inserting after the words Jamaica Bar Association the words or such other association as may represent attorneys at law. And Mr. President, Clause 28 of the bill amends paragraph 8 of the 3rd schedule by deleting the words to act in that behalf and substituting them with the words by the chairman to signify the documents and decisions of the review board. The 2nd amendment in this clause is to paragraph 9.2, Mr. President, by deleting the words and numerals section 57 and substituting, therefore, section 51. Mr. President, Clause 29 of the bill repeals the 4th schedule of the Principal Act, which is no longer necessary due to the new section 66, which provides for the amendment of enactments. Mr. President, as you would have heard, this is quite a technical bill, one which is seeking to correct, clarify, and ensure efficacy, business efficacy, as well as alignment with international standard terminology addressing treatment of public procurement, as well as, of course, ensuring that the matters of special and differential treatment are appropriately provided for, and that MSMEs are also effectively recognized. Mr. President, when we get to committee stage, I will also introduce a few minor amendments, mostly editorial, but also in changing the definition of Jamaican, a Jamaican body, under Clause 2. We will insert a clarification to indicate, which reads as follows, that it will be a body under paragraph 3 in which more than 50% of the equity interest is under the ultimate effective control of, or ultimate ownership by a Jamaican. So the definition of Jamaican that's being proposed by the Amendment Act is being further amended to ensure that the definition of the body is consistent with the definition under the Companies Act. So again, making the legislative framework more cohesive. And there, Mr. President, I end my clause by clause, and I commend this bill to the members of the Senate for their approval. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Before I recognize Senator Morris, we are joined by 3 members of Youth I'm sorry, Equality Youth Jamaica. Where are you guys? Okay. Welcome to the Parliament. You heard me welcome the youngsters earlier. You're always welcome to come and spend some time with us. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming. Senator Morris.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I would like to join in welcoming those groups that are present here to the Senate today as well. Mr. President, I stand to give my support to this piece of legislation which seeks to make amendments to the Procurement Act, which, whilst in government, we passed in 2015. And what is taking place today is an effort to strengthen the existing legislation to make sure that it keeps abreast and apace with modern governance framework, and to make sure that we strengthen the mechanisms as it relates to the procurement of goods and services in our country. You know, Mr. President, when the leader of government business spoke and she mentioned the percentage of the national expenditure that goes to public procurement, I was a bit surprised because I thought it was less than the figure that she had given. But 30% of the national expenditure is indeed significant, because you are talking about over 200 billion Jamaican dollars. And Mr. President, in any economy, that is a significant spend by government. And we have to make sure that the necessary mechanisms are in place so that fairness and equity and transparency takes place in terms of the procurement of goods and services. Because if it is that we are going to stamp out corruption and improve our governance framework, we have to make sure that in securing goods and services for government, there are rules and regulations that are in place to guide the process. And we have to also ensure that if there are rules and regulations, there are sanctions for breaches. And if there are breaches, there must be penalties, and those penalties must be adhered. And I was a bit disappointed that in going through the list of amendments, I never see anything, probably it escaped my eyes, but I never saw anything there as it relates to relating to penalties and so forth for breaches. I know that it is in the principal act, but I was wondering if we would have had a real look at any of those breaches and see how we could improve, strengthen the penalties and so forth that are there for breaches. Because, Mr. President, we have to send a strong signal in government that we are serious at stamping out corruption. Stamping out corruption. And I don't matter who it is. I don't matter who it is. We have to send a clear signal, because every time a corrupt act takes place in government, it robs the little man on the street of a potential benefit. It robs the teachers of possible resources to assist in the classroom or their salary. It robs persons with disabilities of resources that they would need to assist them in their daily lives. And so we have to send a very strong signal where this is concerned. One of the things that I took note of, Minister, is the section dealing with special and differential treatments. And I was wondering if you are going to have a listing of the groups that are likely to benefit from this in either the regulation to come. Because I would like to see it spelled out who are the individuals that are likely to benefit from such an arrangement. And I'll tell you why, Minister, because you know, I am not going to stand up in this parliament and make a presentation without batting for my disabled brothers and sisters, all right? And the truth is, I like the provision, but I would want to make sure that when we are setting the regulation or so, we spell out who are the individuals that are likely to benefit from such a provision. Take for example, well, it's a sector? Sector, okay, all right. Take for example, Minister of Education who, you know, we were together at Labor Day throwing sledgehammer in the concrete down by Eltham, down by St. Anne's Bay Primary School. Yes, man, yes, man. No. That ramp was correctly constructed. I can vouch for that. But the fact of the matter is, Minister, the Ministry of Education on an annual basis have a significant spend in terms of public procurement. And one of the things that I note happens every year is the construction of desks and chairs for classrooms. This is something that persons with disabilities, whether through Abilities Foundation or some other entity associated with the disabled sector, could participate in building chairs and desks for schools, creating employment for persons with disabilities. And I would want to suggest that that matter be taken on board in terms of trying to bolster and generate employment for persons with disabilities. So, Mr. President, I believe that this, these amendments seek to strengthen the existing legislation, and I don't anticipate any major problems from our side in terms of the legislation. Any suggestions that come from this side are positive suggestions that are designed to strengthen and improve the legislation, because we take our responsibility very serious on this side, and so when we review the legislation, it is within the context of improving and strengthening. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Morris, and I listen to you from a seat other than your own.
Can I get
Senator Webby? And you also addressing me from a seat other than your own?
Yeah, thanks for the reminder, Mr. President. May I address the Senate from a seat other than my own? I'm just waiting on the...
You know, I hate to say it, you know, but there is no reason why one of the stewards should not be at the other end of the Senate.
Thank you very much.
One of the orderlies, I mean, you have somebody there. Mr. Marshall, one of the orderlies is to remain there, you know.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and good morning all. Mr. President, I rise in support of the Public Procurement Amendment Act 2018. As you have heard from our leader, this bill, the Public Procurement Act, and its accompanying regulations will together create a modern system for the government to procure goods and services. Mr. President, I think the leader and Senator Morris articulated it quite well, that the government plays an important role in national development because, in fact, if you look at all the numbers, Senator Brown, they are the single largest purchaser of goods and services in the economy. Public procurement provides many of the services, goods and infrastructure we use daily, speaking about roadworks, medication and equipment in hospitals, and textbook use in schools. Therefore, the public procurement management greatly influences our country's economy and people's quality of life. Mr. President, I'd like to speak a little bit about the efficiency or the inefficiency or improving efficiency in public procurement. Mr. President, as I think we are all aware that there has been a cycle of inefficiencies in the public procurement, which is, in my opinion, really unsustainable. I think if we look back at an article in the Observer, I think it was in 2014, where it was stated that $60 billion was spent on public procurement, and approximately 2% of that was actually spent on the bidding documents alone. So what we're talking about is $1.2 billion being spent on the bidding documents alone, and that is coming from the Observer from about 2014. So the numbers may have changed slightly, but the point has been made in terms of the amount that we spend on the bidding documents alone. Mr. President, we have also heard of instances where essential equipment malfunctions, for example, in the public health system, and the tedious procurement process significantly delays the time it takes to get a replacement. That is why, in reviewing the bill, Mr. President, one of the key drivers of change towards greater efficiency in procurement is the electronic procurement platform that we are going to be implementing going forward. In fact, Senator Skeffrey, if you look at the World Bank's electronic government procurement draft strategy, this indicated that e-procurement could actually reduce transaction costs anywhere between 50 to 80%, so it's significant. In fact, if you look at South Korea as an example in terms of their e-procurement system, they actually saved $1.4 billion US in cost, and the private sector in that country saved $6.6 billion in costs compared to a previous paper-based system. So we're talking about big money. And listen to this, Mr. President. Under the paper-based system in South Korea, it took about 30 hours to process a transaction. Now that figure is down to 2 hours, from 30 hours to 2 hours, because of the electronic platform. I believe, Mr. President, when we pass these bills, and I say it here in the Honorable House all the time, what gets measured gets done. I believe that, and I would suggest, Mr. President, that the Minister of Finance, in terms of those figures that I just articulated, that the Minister of Finance set their own targets for cost reduction so they can save taxpayer dollars, so these savings can be allocated to social services, because this is big, big money. So I would ask that the Ministry of Finance, having had this bill passed, let us set some targets in terms of how much we can save in this public procurement. The other point that I raised, and our leader of the House, I was very happy to hear, but the leader in the Senate, the training to use technology. Mr. President, while While technology has the ability to transform processes and improve productivity, the human component is most critical in the process of designing and implementing e-procurement programs. If persons are not trained to use technology, the full benefits will definitely not be realized. The Office of Public Procurement Policy is mandated to provide training, and all stakeholders, including MSMEs, will require training. I'm aware that some initiatives are already underway. I would also like to suggest, Mr. President, that a help desk for resolving any issues will be valuable, especially in the early days of system implementation. And this is very simple. You can have a call center. Mr. President, another factor that can positively influence the outcome of reforms to public procurement is change management. And I make the point about change management even on a broader scale when we're having these fundamental change in the public sector. And let me just share with you my own thoughts on change management and my definition. Mr. President, change management is the application of a structured process and set of tools for managing the people side of a system and organizational changes. So it is my opinion, Mr. President, that change management is therefore necessary to achieve the desired outcomes of the public procurement reforms. So therefore, I'm suggesting again that when these changes are made, that we have a structured change management system in place to ensure that implementation will go smoothly. My other point that I want to raise relates to MSMEs. Mr. President, I noted with the approval that the legislative scheme will facilitate the reservation of a portion of government contracts for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. This supports, if you recall, the MSME entrepreneurship policy of 2013. Mr. President, all around the world, and it is the same for Jamaica, the SME is a major engine of growth. Typically, SMEs account for more than 90% of all firms, 60% of employment, and 40 to 60% of output in most economies. Reserving a portion of government contracts for Jamaican suppliers is a good way for the government to lead by example, buy Jamaican, build Jamaica. Mr. President, I recall the passion of my friend and former president of the Jamaica Manufacturers Association, Mr. Omar Azan, lobbying for local manufacturers, and he has been doing this for many years, of textbooks where we are being outbid by manufacturers in Trinidad to supply the government textbook program. The Trinidad manufacturers could actually bid at a lower price. I want to say that is my understanding, based on some research that I have done, that based on these contracts that they were getting to print the textbooks in Trinidad and that cash flow attached to those contracts, they were able to actually to retool their printer down there and even put us in a less competitive position. So I want to strongly support and add to the voice of Omar, who has been saying this for many years. Let us try and bring that back to Jamaica. Buy Jamaican, build Jamaica. Mr. President, and in fact, I understand for some countries there is a threshold that if you are a foreigner and you bid somewhere between 10 to 20% less than the local producer will get the contract. And you know why? Because if you think about an economy, right, of that job creation and that value added in the local economy, it far outweighs a lower cost than the 10 to 20%. And I think that makes sense. So, Mr. President, I have referred to the MSME policy, and it states that there is a proposed minimum set aside of about 20% of government contracts for eligible micro and small businesses. And I know other countries have implemented that. I would like to also suggest, Mr. President, on a graduated basis, that over a period of time, that we increase that 20% to a minimum of 30% going forward. And that's nothing new. If you look at a World Bank article from 2016, where it noted that the US federal government allocates 23% of all federal contracts to American MSMEs. So this is nothing new. So I believe that, again, that we need to be ambitious and set our targets from 20 to 30% over a period of time. Mr. President, before I close, I want to speak about transparency as an indicator of good governance. Mr. President, transparency is an important element in public procurement. Transparency, in my humble opinion, ensures better quality of public services, encourages competition, fair competition, builds public trust, and ultimately secures development outcomes. The Public Procurement Commission is instrumental in change towards a more transparent system of government. My understanding is that the Commission will be in place by year end, and the Honourable Minister of Finance must be commended for setting the target in light of a delay with the implementation of the legislation for some time now. The Commission will have an oversight function for public procurement, and we will be depending on them to hold procuring entities, suppliers, and other stakeholders accountable for their stewardship of public funds entrusted to them. Mr. President, let me repeat that again. We will be holding them accountable for their stewardship of public funds entrusted to them. Each public contract should have an audit trail that is clear and sufficient to enable a proper evaluation of the procurement process and to assist with the answering of key audit questions. And finally, Mr. President, I want to speak a little bit about the National Action Plan. Mr. President, Jamaica in 2016 signed on as a participant in the Open Government Partnership. I'm sure most of us will remember that. And the Open Government Partnership is a multilateral initiative that aims to secure concrete commitments from government to promote transparency, empower citizens, fight corruption, and harness new technologies to strengthen government. Under this partnership, Jamaica is formulating a national action plan covering the areas I mentioned. Mr. President, I want to use this opportunity to congratulate the Most Honourable Prime Minister for making this commitment, and I am looking forward to the completion of the National Action Plan. As a part of the National Action Plan, Mr. President, I'm calling for a commitment for the routine publication of information related to the formation, award, execution, performance, and completion of public contracts. All information on the contract should be readily available for public scrutiny. This will build trust and improve the credibility of the country and the government. If public procurement is done on time, within budget, and with a high level of transparency and efficiency, we will realize significant improvement in our economy and the quality of life of our people. Mr. President, I thank you very much.
Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Webby.
Oh, sir.
Thank you, sir. And
Senator
can I
Fraser.
speak from a seat? That's not mine.
No.
Thank you, sir.
Of course you can, Senator. Not that we would miss you on the backbench, that bright frock.
Mr. President, I stand to make my very brief contribution to this act entitled an act to amend the Public Procurement Act. Mr. President, let me state, as stated by our leader, our Busher, that we on this side have no serious opposition to the bill. In fact, I'll go a step further to say that we do support this bill. As Minister mentioned, in 2015, the Procurement Act
was passed. And the intent at the time was to improve efficiency and transparency. In fact, I recall being a member of that Joint Select Committee that deliberated on the bill. And I remember the hours and the weekends we spent trying to get the bill passed. And what was very clear was that on both sides of the aisle, all the members of Parliament were intent on giving their full support and making sure that we have a bill, we have a law that really supports transparency and openness in our procurement process. And it is in that light that I wish to find out, Minister, where we are in 2018. The Act was assented to in October of 2015. And the truth is that we really have not heard much about it. So I would like to know, in view of these amendments, some of which are to be on par with international best standards, but in view of the amendments that are being proposed today, what have we accomplished? How have we fared in terms of transparency and accountability in our procurement process? And I would also like to know whether or not anyone, well, the extent to which the Act is being utilized, and whether or not anyone has been found guilty of any breach that is found in the Parent Act. And I ask that because the truth is that recent occurrences runs contrary to the intent for which a Procurement Act was passed. And I believe that it makes no sense that as legislators we play lip service to an act and we laud all the credibility and all the possibilities, but at the point of implementation, nothing is done. And I would like to know whether or not, as a country, we're really serious about ridding corruption. And if we're not, then legislation such as this absolutely makes no sense. And it's a waste of time, really, certainly my time, to come here and pass a piece of legislation that we're not prepared to adhere to. And so I am hopeful, Minister, that you are able to advise us as to what we have accomplished in the last 3 years since the passage, well, 2.5 years since the passage of the Procurement Act. Having said that, I am particularly pleased that this piece of legislation seeks to provide further and better particulars and perhaps give greater treatment to local and domestic companies or Jamaican companies, Jamaican entities. In the bill, we did not go into the kind of detail in terms of Jamaican or foreign. And with the differential treatment that is stated here, I am hopeful that more will be done for our local entities. I don't need to repeat what was said by Senator Floyd or Senator Webley. But indeed, if we are really serious about transforming our country and transforming the economy, and in light of the fact that 30% of our budget goes towards procurement, then we have to ensure that our local bodies, our local entities, our local companies are indeed the beneficiary. This will require more than just a preferential treatment. It also requires, and not anticipating it to be dealt with in this law, but it also requires that more will have to be done by the government to ensure that small and medium-sized enterprises are equipped, are resourced, so that they can be competitive and that they can benefit from these, that they can bid successfully. At the same time, whereas the government has a duty to provide assistance, private entities also have a duty to make sure that they themselves are equipped so that they can be competitive. And what is required, therefore, is a continuation of the dialogue that started in prior to 2016 with our private entities, with governments, and I think to some extent it has continued, to ensure that both stakeholders understand and appreciate what is required and that they are so empowered in a way that they can take advantage of the provisions that are stipulated here in terms of differential treatment. Mr. President, one of the things that I would like to speak to is the issue of bid, and it follows closely when we talk about the differential treatment. Some time ago, I was in a meeting with some business persons, and one of the gentlemen remarked to me that he is a successful businessman today because 30 years ago, when he bid for a project, he wasn't able to get the project on his own, but a foreign company got the project, but a stipulation was that the foreign company had to have a Jamaican counterpart. And in doing that, there was a transfer of knowledge. He was able to learn, he was able to equip himself with the best technology at the time. And after the completion of that project, he was able to go and expand his business. And so I am hoping that when we come to the regulations, Minister, that these are some of the things that we can talk about, making it mandatory. Certainly that for some industries, that where a foreign company is the successful bidder, or in order for them to be considered, there has to be a local counterpart. Because at the end of the day, it does not benefit the country for a foreign company to come in, benefit from our funds, leave the country at the end of the project, and there's no transfer of knowledge. So that is something that I really look forward to when it comes on to the debate on the regulations. Mr. President, I am generally satisfied with this bill, and I actually have no reservations at all. I, however, want to look at some of the things that has been happening recently. And I wonder, Minister, the Act provides that there is that it ought to go to a committee for review in 3 years, and we're embarking on the 3 years in October. And as we consider that, I want us to consider, I know that generally procurement does not affect or doesn't impact directly issues of employment. And I know that when one looks, for example, at the books, the procurement guideline books, that they do not include employment, and it's very limited in how it treats with consultancy. But I'm hoping that as we consider this move towards the mandated review, that is something that we have got to look at. Because occurrences in recent times does not give me any comfort that we are at a point where we can, in a very open and honest and transparent way, truly recruit persons. And when we look what has been happening in recent times, we notice that some of the persons that have been recruited for skills that they have are skills that already exist in entities, skills that exist in the companies. And in my mind, when we're talking about procurement of any services at all, then these are some of the things that must be considered, and they must be considered when it comes on to procuring a service, a human resource service, i.e. for consultants or otherwise. And so I commend it to you as something to consider, and the technical persons are here, something to consider as we get ready to form that joint select committee to review the bill at the 3-year mark. Mr. President, I have had to work with the Ministry of Finance, and particularly the department or the unit that deals with procurement. And there is no doubt in my mind that the persons with whom I have interfaced are extremely knowledgeable. The challenge I have, though, is that I am not so convinced that the persons who have to deal with procurement outside of that grouping at the Ministry of Finance are equally knowledgeable. And so one of the things that I would love to see happening in light of the amendments, in light of the fact that it is still a relatively new act, that there is greater training of our practitioners. I do not believe that we are fully aware of what is required of us under the Procurement Act of 2015, and certainly these amendments which are being debated here today. And so, in closing, I ask that as we seek to achieve efficiency, we seek to achieve transparency, we seek to achieve more government savings, that we also understand the importance of training our procurement practitioners so that they are aware of the rules and the provisions and the requirement in the Act. I also ask that there be training or public education for those who have to interface with the procurement system, because there are a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises who simply still do not understand what is required of them. I look forward to them, and I look forward to the regulations, because it will give in detail the different categories and what is required. And once that is done, then more public education have to be done to ensure that all participants, all stakeholders are brought on board and that we are all singing from the same hymn sheet. With that said, Mr. President, I look forward to the Minister sharing with me the lessons that we have learned, the savings that we have been able to accomplish, and just generally how, in the last 2.5 years, the Procurement Act has worked. With that said, Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Fraser-Binns. Senator Hill, I see you're addressing me from a seat of your own.
Mr. President, I'm so pleased that you're in such a wonderfully pleasant and accommodating mood today, as you always have been every Friday that we get here, Mr. President. You were interrupting me there a minute. Mr. President, naturally, I rise to support this bill. I've been watching it for years, go through a number of iterations. And I want to say to Senator Binns, Fraser-Binns, there are one or two things that I support what you say on, but one of them is not the fact as to ask the leader of the House to give, the leader of the Senate, sorry, to give an account of how the bill has been working, because it's not yet operational. And that's why we're trying to get it there. It's been there to be done, but it has not yet, it's not yet operational. That aside, though, Mr. President, I am just very pleased that this act has come at this time. And as any good law should, Mr. President, these proposed amendments to the Public Procurement Act are crafted to help procuring Government of Jamaica entities act in a fair and equitable manner towards Jamaican persons and firms and overseas entities in a transparent and predictable manner, using an even, disclosed, and knowable to all playing field. Not something that is hidden in somebody's back pocket or briefcase and nobody knows what it says. Mr. President, these amendments are also to encourage, and this is vital, to encourage, to assist, to make clear to young and new entrepreneurs. And Mr. President, people are calling me when I'm using my phone to speak. That's not proper. This is to encourage new entrepreneurs or entrants to GOJ government procurement business, that they are welcomed. We need to welcome new entrepreneurs, new entrants, even if they're not young, to bid for government business. Firms in the SME sectors can now compete with big firms on an even playing field, and the money government spends will have a better chance of being spread more widely across the economy and not concentrated among a few big or favored businesses or influential persons. In other words, Mr. President, the issue and the risk of what we despise, the corruption that tends to happen around procurement, these amendments to this act are done over a number of years now to make sure that we wipe out, reduce significantly. Let me just use the term reduce, because some smart person somewhere is always going to find a new corrupt way to do something once you wipe out the old corrupt practices. We must be vigilant, but these amendments allow us to practice that vigilance and in a public manner. Mr. President, I fully expect this wider spread of government procurement money among small and medium-sized enterprises will not only create more compensation among companies for government procurement spending money, and thus drive down prices and push up efficiency. But from where I sit at the Economic Growth Council, Mr. President, I'm pleased that most importantly, these amendments will foster and drive an increase in broader economic growth and job creation. In other words, for new jobs, for people can get more work, not just a few people get richer out of government procurement business. And I know my colleague was one of those few that will get a lot of money. Mr. President, we do that too in places. Mr. President, I want to relate Senator Webby brought up the issue of school books, textbooks being printed. I have a personal example. When I used to write for that newspaper that Senator Brown loves so much on a consistent basis on a Friday rather than coming here, since you asked, Mr. President, it is that really well-established newspaper established in 1834 called the Gleaner. It's a new love? Oh, you've noticed, Mr. President. I'm glad you noticed. Yes, with placards, I mean, Mr. But we won't go there today. We won't go there today. That's right. What we're saying, though, is when I was writing on a regular basis for the Gleaner, I looked into the procurement of textbooks. And Minister Thwaites then was a minister, MP Ronnie Thwaites. And to his credit, in 2015, I got pretty much all the printers in Jamaica. He accommodated us to a meeting, and he was welcoming. And I made the case to him then that printers need a 5-year contract. First of all, people in a certain country up north they get the contract. They take it to another CARICOM country, which we won't name because we're friends and neighbors, and they bid for it in Jamaica. What do you say? Sorry. So they bring it to Jamaica, they win the contract, and our Jamaican printers don't get nothing. So I walked in there. Mr. Thwaites was, as I said, accommodating. And I said, as a banker, you have to do a couple of things. You have to give them a 5-year contract so that they can go out and buy equipment that is modern, pay people who are good at this business, so that they can compete and win the contracts to print textbooks as long as printing textbooks remain. I'm not sure how long that will last. To his credit, Mr. Thwaites said, yes, I will give them the 5-year contract. And this is now where I want to agree with Senator Binns, and where I keep pushing not only that those of us on the government side, like the Minister of Education then was an enabler, the Economic Growth Council an enabler, NEPA an enabler on one side, but the private sector implementers must step up. The door was open in my view, Mr. President, and they did not do the stepping that they should have upstepped. And so we need to see that when we put this procurement bill in place and it passes into law, it is an encouragement for entrepreneurs, it's an encouragement for businesses to bid for the money that the government of Jamaica must rightly spend, and we prefer that it be spent among Jamaican entrepreneurs and businesses. But businesses, just like I push enablers everywhere I go, Montego Bay yesterday and everywhere before that, I push government enablers to enable businesses to do what they must do. When government enablers enable you, like we're doing with this wonderful set of amendments to this act, please step up business and take the business that is being offered from taxpayers' money and do it competitively. So I'm encouraging both sides. The government enablers, those of us in local government, the Minister of Finance has done a tremendous job. I've been working, I want to pick out some of the people I see here. I know Cecile and her boss from the Ministry of Finance. No, I'm not giving them a carte blanche to say they're excellent at all times. I'm just telling you, on this particular bill, I know they've been very good. I've been working with them, and they've done a very good job at it. So I want to compliment them. The work that is done there must now be taken up by businessmen. I see young Senator Crawford is right there taking up his business. We need young entrepreneurs. Young people from the university who are doing engineering must say, this procurement bill now, I can compete with whoever is out there because it's no hiding again. Everybody can step forward. I hope in time, Mr. President, some of it is being done now. I hope in time every single government contract that is awarded is published on a dashboard that anybody can see who get it, who bid for it, and what they're doing, and track it. That's where e-government, I think, is taking us, and we want to get there fast so that there's no funny stuff going on with the taxpayers' money and we can't know. It is that, for those reasons, Mr. President, I'm so pleased that these amendments have come at this time. It's very clear that these are prepared to be provide economic stimulus in this economy, to make sure we enhance the potential of local industries to grow, to make sure that we monitor, the governance is put in place to properly monitor what must be done. And it's not going to be finished. Another few years from now, the world is moving so fast, we might be back here to make some more amendments. That would not necessarily be bad, but it must now get through so that we can get something that's been doing for 2015, for God's sake. Why are we taking so long to pass this, Mr. President? I hope today that as we get through this and as we discuss this, we can unleash this piece of legislation to make it useful to our entrepreneurs and our businesses to go out and do business and grow the economy. In fact, Mr. President, to make sure we have both progress and prosperity through this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hill. Senator Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. President. I got to check you for the funding, check you. Need some funding from over that side. Yeah, for the vice presidential race. So, President, I'm going to try and speak from a seat that is my own. Not going to follow those people over that side. But a lot of times we discuss what, and we don't delay ourselves to discuss why. I have not been studying the scripture as I should. But I think why is God's question? It's the most basic question. In that child consistently asks why. And when we speak to government spending, the reason we encourage government spending is because it has always been identified as one of the 3 areas to promote growth or to induce economic activity. However, by itself, it is not sufficient. In fact, government spending or any other spending that has high leakage will often not achieve the role that it was intended to achieve. A long time ago, I heard in universe that leakage, I think, was multiplier effect was 1/1 minus the leakage. The higher the leakage, the lower the multiplier effect. And so, what I would love to see in the future, that I've not seen now, is that there's a greater effort to encourage certain actions within government interaction or government contracts. For example, if a man has contract workers in the main, government should seek not to encourage that by giving him certain contracts. It's unfortunate that government also participates so extensively in contract work. But let's look at security, for example. A person who seeks to have his security forces not treated worse than the dogs that they manage will find it difficult to be a cheaper offering than the person who seeks to cut costs through cutting wages. Government should seek to ensure that that isn't encouraged in its effort. Government should also seek to encourage rural participation. Now, why is it that for small things like, for example, catering, someone from Kingston is catering an event in St. Mary, in St. Elizabeth, in Portman? Why is it that small things like that, proximity to space, cannot be considered to encourage certain rural entities to participate? Especially because government would also not want leakage, internal leakage. Because if leakage happens from St. Elizabeth to Kingston, then migration will also happen from St. Elizabeth to Kingston. And then we start to say we have a squatting problem in Kingston. So therefore, we want for the procurement to encourage that. Now, while I was thinking about it, I realized that we also must find an equilibrium, because you might say you want procurement to encourage businesses with single parents, but then the next thing you know, you start to encourage divorces so that people can become single parents. There is an equilibrium that one has to find as to the type of country you want and what you encourage with profits. Now, the number one lesson I've learned between the difference from seeking wages and seeking profit is risk associated. Seeking wages have less risk than seeking profit. And knowledge and risk have been proven to be inversely related, meaning that the higher the level of knowledge, the lower the level of risk. That's why we don't want to go down a dark street. It's just that we don't have enough knowledge. The same street with a street light, and we go down that street because we have more information, we have more knowledge. So what I'd love to see is that there's a central repository of years of procurement so that a business person can have knowledge of where is the likely investment. For example, everybody knows my business, I'm in eggs. I'd love to see all the government entities that have procured eggs, what's the amount of eggs, what's the egg products that they've suppose they did mayonnaise. If I see that the Ministry of Education did mayonnaise for the last 10 years, 15K, then I might invest in a mayonnaise machine. But I'm not going to invest in a mayonnaise machine without the knowledge. And then it's 3 weeks for me to bid on mayonnaise. I don't have a machine. Now, if I was able to go in a central repository and say, okay, this is an area that they have procured, this is the amount, this is the price that they have paid, then I can say, oh, listen, I can go into this business and I can go and try to do that. Senator Webby spoke to certain rules like in the United States, I say 15 to 20%, the local man will get it. Now, we have to remember, first of all, that government don't have the money. Government really manage money for people. It's our money and government manage it. So government shouldn't encourage inefficiency on the part of an entrepreneur. So therefore, anybody who is getting that blight, 10 to 15%, should be willing to open himself to an audit, to an efficiency audit, to say that it is your inefficiencies. And I can tell you, in my first year of business, I have found almost 8 million that I just by mistakes we have lost. Now, that shouldn't be something encouraged because it's paid for by government. So therefore, a man who says, okay, I am incapable to compete with the corn prices in America, that's an incompetence. I cannot do that. However, if I waste corn, that efficiency audit should show that. And there should be a pool of funds to then allow me to borrow to become efficient. So if I have a bad machine, there should be a pool of funds to make me get a better machine. But you can't, in perpetuity, pay me more for things that I could change. And so therefore, or do better. And so therefore, I start to buy a vehicle for myself out of the business and pay for the gas out of the business because government is willing to pay an additional 20%. So those areas, for example, that you are incapable to compete, fine, but open yourself to a efficiency audit. Our procurement also must be exposed to equal playing field. So, President, when the Chinese, for example, can carry in things without paying duty for one project and then transfer it to another project, that's not an equal playing field. Now, at the point that you transfer to another project, you should pay those duties. Because the person who you're competing with is paying duties on those things coming in. So therefore, an equal playing field, there will be things like the China Harbor coming in for that project and him pay no duty for that project, fine. But when you want to meddle into other things, pay the duty and let us be on the playing field. If we're not on the same playing field, then you're joking about Jamaicans getting into the procurement. The other thing is the services we have to look at in great detail. When I was in the Ministry of Tourism, and there's a whole heap of conversation about the Ministry of Tourism now, there was...
Any procurement issue?
Not at our time.
No.
No, well, I don't...
I don't hear those comments.
You know, Mr. President, there's a lie that has been told that I was paid for by Jamaica to go to England, and that's not true. I just never bothered to answer. I actually went to present a paper, but you see, a lot of people over there have never presented a paper. They don't know about being paid for knowledge. So I was invited by Barbados to present a paper. And I did shell it down. That's the truth. My uncle said I should always tell the truth. The problem is, no. Every time I go foreign, these people invite me based on what I know. So let me tell you some of what I know. I want to say to you, Mr. President, you're just disturbing me now and just getting my tea. You understand? Sure. Well, let me tell you some of what I know, Mr. President. We have to ensure that we have, I don't remember what I'm going to tell you, Mr. President. This man just, yes, in the Ministry of Tourism. We did a research, a simple research about tourism linkages. And that research came from someone in Britain. The methodologies were clear. The data was available. Yet we decided that the expertise had to come from over Britain. We could have done that research, UE, UTech, UCC, NCU. Any one of my students, master's students, could have done that research to say that a hotel with 100 rooms use 600 eggs. That wasn't necessary. There's certain efforts that should be reserved once it is able. And the second experience I had, Mr. President, was when we wanted to do a website. And the only bid for the website for entertainment registry came from a Canadian company. The only bid came from a Canadian company. And that wasn't because nobody else was capable. But when I asked other people what happened, we didn't know. There needs to be greater access to the informations of calls. Most time it is in the newspaper somewhere. Nobody don't even buy newspaper anymore. There needs to be maybe a registry where persons can say, I'm interested in this information. And this information come to my phone, this information go to social media. That interesting bidders should be able to say once a bid come out, it come directly to an interested bidder. Because all these people that go and train in computer science and thing at UE, none made a bid other than a Canadian company. So therefore, we have always been talking about new ways to communicate. We have to now look at new ways to equally inform. So in encouraging these things, I think the future bill could have designate some areas of encouragement, like less contract workers, health care for workers, reasonable pay, union representation, if that is something you want to encourage. Each government would have decided what they want to encourage. To discourage some action, to create higher efficiency, and not just to remunerate inefficiency, to create an equal playing field, and to give greater information so that persons in business can perceive less risk and greater likelihood to succeed. I think if the bill should have that in the future, it would encourage greater participation of the Jamaican entrepreneur. Thank you, Mr. President.
Just coincidence. Coincidence.
Senator Scurfy, you said nothing about a family affair. I recognize. You're recognized, Mr. Senator.
President, it is only coincidence that I am speaking immediately after Senator Crawford, but it's still a pleasure. Mr. President, the amendment I have no difficulty with. It turns out that the difficulty I had was with the principal bill that was passed in 2015. That is not being debated today. But the concerns for procurement, as I understand it, is that you wish to reduce, subdue corruption, enhance transparency, create a level playing field. But at the same time, on the other hand, you would wish to generate efficiency and timeliness. And the parent bill and act, and this present bill they're both doing a lot for the purposes of subduing corruption, promoting transparency, and so forth, Mr. President, and I do congratulate that. But I am not satisfied that our efforts are doing as well on the other side, where we are trying to do things in a timely manner and have it done in certain time frame. My understanding that if you have a project, say, that is valued at $1 billion, and although the billion, there's a time when I was growing up that $1 billion wasn't even mentioned. That is how unusual it was to talk about $1 billion. But $1 billion now for a project is not unusual anymore. And that is the type of project that would be in Category 1 and would have to end up at Cabinet for approval and so forth. It appears to me that from the time of advertising it in the newspaper to say you're going to do this piece of road or you're going to build this particular building, etc., to the time when the contract is approved finally and awarded and signed off is at least 1 year. And I am advised that that is with some effort to ensure that it goes through. If it goes through its normal course, it could be a problem. There is a certain amount of bureaucracy and so on. And I know, as one person mentioned, Senator Brown mentioned, sort of voce, I am learning this in a direct way, so that we do have systems in place to suppress dishonesty and to suppress inequalities and so forth. And I applaud that, and that's very important. But at the same time, what can I do to ensure that I could reduce this 1 year wait or 2 years wait to 6 months? Is it possible? Is it possible? And that is part of the question, that when we go to look at the regulations and so on, we should take into account. I heard Senator Floyd Morris mention the question of, is it Senator Fraser Binns, criminalizing certain conduct. I am not personally, and I'm speaking personally, in favor of criminalizing certain conducts for procurement, because I am all in favor of administrative penalties. And you see the procurement, when you read the procurement legislation, so it doesn't have much involvement in it for politicians. The involvement, the decision makings are all servants of the state, not politicians. It is the heads of departments and so on who make the decisions. At the same time, if you criminalize mistakes, what you will do is that the government is the only place you are not able, in Jamaica, that you cannot make a mistake. You go to prison for a mistake. But in addition to that, the potential that your mistake may send you to the general penitentiary has a chilling effect, if not a crippling effect. Yes, mistake, negligence, and so on should be penalized by administrative actions, surcharging, etc. Dismissal sometimes, demotion. But to go to the extent that you go to prison, I have a little difficulty, and I hesitate with that. Yes? That's what I interpret my colleague. Yes, well, you know what I mean, I'm an interpreter. But I do not think, because you see, what it does, it stifles innovation and effort. So we have to be very careful how we are pressing for criminalizing of some of the, if you fail to follow certain procedures and so on. I know it's popular, and I know that this is not going to be what I'm saying very popular, but I think that we have to bear that in mind. And I come to some other issues, two issues that I want to touch on that will affect efficiency. So we have now, over many years, over the last 20 years or so, established our NCC, and we have established our sector committees, and we have our contractor registration. And you have levels. It is only if you are at the top level that you are entitled to carry out and to be awarded certain contracts. So it doesn't matter my own personal efficiency, because I don't have the experience in road building. Even if I have certain things and so on, I've never done it and so forth, it is not likely that I will get a contract at a tier 1 level. But what is the story, Mr. President, is that the tier 1 level, there are a limited amount of contractors. There are a finite amount, Mr. President. Very limited. Mr. President, a finite amount. If it is that you are trying, as the government, to spend $60 billion annually or so for capital works, think about if you have 20 or 30 grade 1 contractors that can do work for $1 billion or more. What it means, Mr. President, is that the contracts would have to go around basically in a circle among the same persons. And that is good. It makes us wealthy, those of us who are there, and even more wealthy. But it also affects efficiency. It means, Mr. President, that you as a grade 1 contractor, Brigham Construction, and by the way, there's no Brigham Construction.
Owned by you.
Owned by me, yes. I wish I were, But what Brigham Construction does is that Brigham Construction bids for the contracts. He doesn't have the capacity because he has a contract in Montego Bay, he has one in Kingston, he has one in Westmoreland, and he still bids for another one in St. Mary. And so as a result of that, Mr. President, there is a problem. So one of the things I would like to be considered when these new regulations are developed is how can we encourage greater input and movement among the grades, and how can we encourage additional persons to get on board so that we can have a wider pool of experience for the contracting of the larger contracts. To me, it is a great problem at this time. So I put that on the table, and I don't quite know the answer to the question, but I do know it needs to be addressed. The second point is that I am not sure that if Brigham Construction gets on Tier 1, is registered as a Grade 1 contractor, but every time Brigham Construction carries out a piece of work, it is 6 months late, it is $500 million in excess and overrun, but Brigham continues to be a Grade 1 contractor, and Brigham is still entitled to bid and still win. And when he wins, the procurement entity says, oh God, Brigham, again, we are going to be 6 months out of time and we are going to be out of pocket, but there does not appear to be much that can be done. That has to be... What I'm saying to you, Mr. President, that these are some issues as we formulate and as the regulations are taken into account. One, we need to encourage the registration of more persons who are capable of doing the work so that it can be more efficient and it can move more quickly. Mr. President, we have to deal with that. And secondly, if I don't perform, I should not be permitted without penalty to carry on being parading and masquerading as a Grade 1 contractor when I am known throughout the industry for inefficiency. And I will end, Mr. President. Why are you saying amen already?
Amen in agreement.
Oh, she agreed that I'm going to finish. I don't understand. Mr. President, in the Principal Act, we have a system of appeal. And again, I am struck by it. And as I said, that's not before you today. But when you look at that system of appeals, you'll see that it is done, as I understand it, in a standstill period and so on. And there's an appeal to the procuring entity, which I have no difficulty with. That is right. But there's also an appeal to an external body. I wonder what is the time period now will be added to the implementation of contracts when these appeal processes will have to be done. And then, when you appeal, and you appeal to the commission that Brigham chairs, your appeal, let me put it the other way, a commission. Brigham is the appellant. Brigham appeal is dismissed. Brigham doesn't say, all right, you have some distinguished people on the panel and so forth. Brigham says that the commission is wrong. Or maybe some other worse things. So I decided to go to court to challenge the commission in judicial review, get a stay of the decision. So a contract that already took a year or 2 years to reach this stage, for it to go through the appeal process, plus my judicial review process, and somebody else mentioned somewhere else, but let's say just to the High Court, that's another 2 years, if you're lucky. So on the face of it, this extensive appeal process is attractive. But is it going to be in the long run beneficial? Or could we have a situation where the process continues, the contract is awarded, but the aggrieved contractor may be compensated then? I think that these are some of the things that we have to take into account. Do we stop the work? Or is it better that at the end of the day, if it was badly done and you were maltreated or mistreated, that you are compensated financially so that government does not grind to a halt in the interim? So it is on the other side of the balance I am concerned about. I don't think that as a country we have paid sufficient attention to the balance. What we are doing many times is throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We are simply saying we are suppressing corruption and to hell with everything else. And I think that's a mistake. It's a mistake. And I'm urging us to pay a little bit more time and attention to the other side, because I always knew, and even when I had a temporary stint as the Attorney General. Is that so? I see. I'm not going down there. Short stint, thank you. And I mentioned the Attorney General's department, a great place. And I was privileged to be there for a short time. It means that because of that, I was well loved. Because of the short time. But the Attorney General's department is the department that gives advice. It gives legal advice. And it represents and so on. But let's take it is advising on a government contract or whatever it is. So you could look at it as a strictly paper and strictly theoretical. But each piece of paper that passed through the Attorney General's department actually represents a life. Because when the department reviews and approves or whatever and it goes through, it means that a project goes through and that boy on the Walton Park Road gets a better school, or his mother gets a job in some place in some government agency, or his father or his brother works on a government project. So what I'm saying is, procurement at the end of the day is not an end in itself. It is not just there to carry through, but when it is done well, efficiently, it brings benefit to people who don't even know that there is a department dealing with the Attorney General's department or any other department. It brings benefit to the people. So I would ask us in the next dispensation that we spend some more time on the efficiencies, cutting time frames, moving, getting more people being ready to do government contracts, to do it on time, and so that we as a people can better ourselves economically and otherwise. I support the amendments, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Bram. Senator Brown.
Mr. President, it appeared to me that in respect to this bill to amend the Procurement Act, that there's a certain degree of unanimity on many issues. To speak and not have some deviation from the unanimity that has existed so far. Let me say, Senator Bram, all that you have said resonates with me. I sat as a member of the board that you chair now. I recall, for example, Mr. President, a tender went out for tiles to fix a vacant floor so that we could rent the floor and earn money for the state. And offset the expenses of the organization. People bid, but one of the persons who bid was not categorized as part of the construction, was a hardware, but not part of the construction industry. The person had the tiles, but that bid had to be excluded. We had to send to Italy to get the tiles that was already in Jamaica. That type of inefficiency is what some of the procurement rules lead to. Good is the intent, but we know that the road to hell has been paved with a lot of good intention. And as I listened to the senator, I wondered how much of the people who have been practically involved in the procurement process have influenced the legislations over time. Because that's the key. How does this advance efficiency? We have seen cases where Senator Crawford raised it. There's a project for small contractors in St. Mary. The winner of the bid comes from St. Clarendon, from Clarendon. And you ask yourself, how can this person from Clarendon supply to St. Mary's cement cheaper than the people in St. Mary or even Kingston or St. Catherine? But there are tricks and trades in the business of procurement. And I don't think the country has gotten the full benefit from the procurement rules. Mr. President, there was a leader of this country who, in opposition, used to campaign on the basis that those who breach procurement rules must wear short pants. I think Senator Bryan became the Attorney General to that leader, Mr. Bruce Golding. To Mr. Bruce Golding, who argued that those who breach the procurement rules should wear short pants. In other words, they should go to prison. During his tenure, I don't recall anybody going to prison for breaching the procurement rules. And it tells us that a lot of people talk one thing in opposition, but when they get the chance to implement it, they fail. Mr. President, 3 years ago, 3 years ago, in October, the procurement bill was passed into law, signed by my good friend, Senator Floyd Morris, as president. And you may get the chance to sign this one, the amendments. Tom, going to come back? But, point I'm making, the Governor General gave his assent on the 5th day of October 2015. Almost 3 years now, 2.5 years. Why has the bill not been implemented? Why has the act not been implemented in this time? Why has it not been implemented in the 2.5 years? Why has there been no action? See, Mr. President, I am deeply concerned about corruption in the affairs of our country. It has been around for a long time. One of the regulations were going to be regulation of 1963. Despite that regulation, resources allocated for building that was refused to attend the Commission of Inquiry. Rules was there to prevent people defrauding the tree for defrauding. We have established since the 80s, Mr. President, the Office of the Contractor General to monitor the procurement. I have had the fortune, good Mr. Ashton Wright, and I commend to others. I read up that publication, No Trophies Gained, because it tells us who the protection of taxpayers' money. Mr. President, I'm concerned that the Office of the Contractor General, who was in the past insist on timely the last annual report to the Parliament was 2015. I'm concerned that we are being shortchanged as a Parliament when a Commission of Parliament report, I'm talking the Office of Contractor General, and the failure in the middle of 2018 to provide us with the 2017 annual report. This is not like the Contractor General, and I'm wondering what is happening as crept in since, is it since February 2016? I don't know why, but we need some explanation as a Parliament why we're not getting Contractor General for 2016, 2017. About overrun. We will get those two reports that are outstanding from the Contractor General. But I also, Mr. President, seek to get from the Contractor General another report from June last year. And that report, as the Gleaner carried on June 10th, 2017, Minister questioned in OCG of government if we got value for money. If the valuation reports are what we were paid, or we were paid less. It's important quickly provide to this Parliament the report on the UDC sale of the rooms property in Ocherios. We were promised from June last year. Senator Webber in the country. General report as breaching procurement rules. For breaching procurement rules, I've now turned up in the report from Senator Reid last week as consultant fired in 2011 for breaching procurement rules. But that person is now employed as a consultant to the government of Jamaica. And I ask, how comes? How comes if we're serious about the Mr. President, national bids, national suppliers, and to bend to meet the international. Maybe like the vote on Israel. Put Jamaica and Jamaicans first. Let us be clear enough, Mr. President. Go back to Mr. P.J. Patterson time as Prime Minister. We have been Mrs. Simpson Miller as Prime Minister. I've been hearing for too long. Let's get it done and give preference. Like you have said, Senator Webber has said and read. That's what the work on that site for which a foreign agency won the contract said. In Jamaica, we are nobody. And that should send collective chills up our collective spines. When the Jamaican people are saying, in this country, We can dismiss him, but I take him seriously. When people feel that in our country, I am nobody, so that a worker can say, I am nobody in my own country. When in our country, our worker, qualification of our people, or to make up the National Housing Trust, security guard companies, breaching proper statutory deduction, but government is giving them the contracts. Procurement rules must protect the rights of our workers. It must protect our state. For Mr. President, Mr. President, I want to ask some questions. Will the amendments in this rule, this act, change in a way the procurement of used cars for the police so that it never happen again where we spend 200 million and as you may wish to be? This is about Jamaica. Boldly taking the decision to change this used car policy, that procurement that has gone bad, that debacle, and I commend Minister Dan, second-hand used car. Then I ask even more so, in the Parliament, as happening in a government agency that is duty-bound legislation, I speak signed on the 8th of November, 2016, signed by a representative of the National Works Agency, signed by a representative of China Harbour Engineering Company, check. Backfill, expansion joints, overheads and profit for the contractor. That bill of quantity signed off by the on the 8th of November 2016. Efficiency, $96 million. Sure. Signed off by that senior representative at the National Works Agency and China Construction Engineering Company, the fencing. To $96 million, and Minister, that has to be approved by the Cabinet. What role did the Cabinet play in that? Because the Cabinet signed off on this. Did the Honorable, then it would be a breach of the procurement rules. If he did, the question is, what did Mr. Onis, Andrew Michael Onis, did as Prime Minister? To $96 million. That's it. And the country needs answer to that. A jumbo explanation. That what happened was they extended the amount of fencing. Nonsense. We have the information. That's mumbo jumbo. Something is. Let's take a. Manchester, I want you to deal with that. When it comes to partisanship, you are making me look like an angel. When it comes to partisanship, Senator Matthew Shamuda, you are making me look like a. But that's what you were doing when you spoke. Services. This country needs to know. This country needs to know that under our procurement rules, it has allowed a managing board for which the requisite technical attention as a senator, that $1,000 for what they're invoicing. Attendance at Petrojam, a month. That's a couple of days, including weekends. Saturday and Sunday. $17,000 for doing what? Consult regarding loyalty program. Consult regarding loyalty program. Assist in development of specification relating to inventory and credit and sales up. One-on-one advisory to the CEO. Advisory. And listen to this, Mr. President. Participation. Just attend. Just attend. Because it could be said that you attended the Senate. Mr. President, 17 million Jamaican dollars per year. President, That's about 3 times. And that tells us for the PAAC, the details and this contract will come out. Mr. President, I know the individual. He worked in Jamaica before. The contract ended with the company with which he worked. Not a successful track record, but we brought on a waste. This is the reason why people of this government, people are saying that this is the most corrupt government in the history of Jamaica. That's in the of the 70s, and any year wish to announce of the 80s and the 90s, it passed it. So what is clear, this is the most, I share the view of those people who say that this is the most. Mr. President, Mr. President, that you are corrupt. Questions about heads of government agencies. It is that separation that has enabled the scandal, the shame and scandal that is now taking place at Petrojam. To use car, and I could go on and on, the corruption stinks to high heaven. I could talk about the 10 million Miss Bosa grass. I could go on and on. I could talk about the phone. This is the most corrupt government in the history of our country, and you have only gone 2.5 years. Mr. President, of the amendments, which we will support, I just hope you'll be with me. I could talk about
also do a comparison.
My friend, private sector leader, you would turn your face against it. But to tell me now that the issue is about my government, I condemn any corruption in my government. Like you, I am not going to is. The reality is, what is happening at what the hell is the corruption stinks, and I hope that this can be a sanitizer. This can be a deodorizer. Sadly, I don't think it will be, because too many fingers too. Yes, sticky fingers have penetrated. And for that, Mr. President, the DNA has been inserted. Common ground can be. Talk to me about Petrojam afterwards. May it please you, Mr. President. I'm surprised that you find comfort in this corruption.
Senator Samuda.
So,
go ahead, please.
Wouldn't want to corrupt the answer. Start, Mr. President. You know, credibility of things. I'd like to point to an article published on the 22nd of February 2018. Jamaica improves on the Corruption Perception Index, but still has work to do. So that immediately, before going any further, tells you, Senator Brown, that you misled the Parliament by stating that this is A, the most corrupt country, government, and B, that things are that bad or things are that worse. The fact is, Mr. President, we are improving and we are working assiduously to ensure that mistakes of the past aren't repeated.
Many sins of the past.
Look, you know, I hoped when I joined the Senate I wouldn't get transactional. Let's call it transactional, and we'd focus on the big picture. The fact is, President, I have no qualms in saying that it is my position that actions of this government I find quite offensive. And we're getting transactional. But all right. The zinc fence scandal, the zinc scandal, the furniture scandal of 1990, the shell waiver scandal, the motor vehicle importation scandal, the foreign exchange scandal of the sand mining scandal of 1994, the water commission scandal of 94 to 95, the Montego Bay street people scandal of 99, the fat cat scandal of... I mean, stop this nonsense. Because, and I'm sorry, but I will not allow the Hansard and the records of this nation to be corrupted by your misrepresentation and misleading of the Parliament. I refuse. I'm sorry. you know, and you want a criticism of my side. I have a criticism of my side. Mr. President, the fact is, this country was set back decades by the actions of an administration, and we do not yet have administration, of which I have no problem taking shared responsibility. What I'm calling, the fact is, Mr. President, the act before us is a good one. It's not perfect, but it's a good one. The amendments before us make the act stronger. Do rules or the position of rules create a perfect system? Of course not, Mr. President.
Mr. President, the time being 1:20, might I ask that the Senate be allowed to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day?
Time being distinction that has to be made in how we label transactions, label actions. Are there inefficiencies in government? Are there inefficiencies with how some projects are executed? It's not necessarily corruption. Are there mistakes made? I heard people being separated from their work, because at the end of the day, it's the people's money and the people's interests that we must protect. But not all actions are criminal. And the Mr. President, I think we can all agree that while discussing issues of procurement and passing related laws, we have to ensure there's adequate enforcement and oversight. That is why it is a credit to our is allowed to chair committees such as PAC and PAAC. Mr. President, that is something that we are proud of and we are happy about. Equally, sir, that the stewards of these oversight committees come to the table, however, with clean hands, are beyond reproaching their current and former conduct of public affairs, and their management of taxpayers' money reflects same. It is in this context, Mr. President, because we weren't going down this road, you have opened a particular door and thrown mud for no reason. But it is in this context, Mr. President, in which the current chairman of the PAC must tell the country whether it is true that during his tenure as Minister of Tourism, his sister racking up millions of dollars as part of the administrative staff between 2002 and 2007, Mr. President. Mr. President, if that is true, that is nepotism, he must come to the country and tell us where he stands, where that matter is. Additionally, Mr. President, the chairman of the PAC must also tell this country and the Parliament whether it is true that a relative of his is a director of a travel agency that secured all the travel bookings
Point of order, Mr. President.
Of the country, of the ministry he led, Mr. President.
Point of order. The standing order requires that ulterior motives must not be ascribed to members of either house. And I believe that that is what is being done by Senator Matthew Samuda, and I urge you to apply the standing order.
I am not of the view that he is inscribing motive, he's asking a question.
Mr. President, it is unfortunate there's not a standing order for hypocrisy, because we'd be able to call on it every single Friday, Mr. President, based on the actions of Senator Brown. Well, we soon address that. Additionally, Mr. President, the chairman of the PAC must come to the country if he's to continue sitting in that position and tell us of the transaction that would have facilitated, or the procurement exercise that would have allowed a relative of his travel for the Ministry of Tourism. I think it is only fair, colleagues,
again, Mr. President,
that we know the truth, Mr. President. Come and tell us how it stands.
Mr. President, the member is assuming that the former minister, had anything to do with the procurement. And again, I raise the issue. Even questions can be. Am I allowed to address you, Mr. President?
Listening to you now.
But I'm not getting a chance to speak to you. So even questions, Mr. President, even questions can be, is open a sesame. Open up a Pandora box here, where everybody now ignore the standing orders. And I urge you again, President, apply the standing orders against ascribing improper motive to members of either.
Brown, Senator Brown, Senator Samuda,
President.
Senator Samuda, 1 minute.
Yes, sir.
Senator Brown, I have listened carefully to your point of order, restated for a second time, and again I rule that the Speaker may continue. He has not breached the standing orders, nor his motive. He is merely asking a question. And may I take the opportunity to remind you that it is you.
With the greatest of respect, I've not started down any road, and I think your comment is not fair. No, I like how anything feel, but I believe I spoke in accordance with the standing orders, and the President needs to enforce
the standing orders. He can continue.
So, President, you would note that the roads we travel on, and certainly the roads that Jamaicans are now traveling on, are paved a lot better than they were previously, Mr. President. So the road we are on is a better road than Senator Brown was on. Yeah. However, let us be clear. It must be that the chairman of the PAC answers these questions before he is able to continue any further committee meetings. Because I would hate to think, Mr. President, Mr. President, that his issue with the traveling of the ministry is that the
Mr. President,
Senator
point
Samuda.
of order, Mr. President.
1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute.
Matthew Cross and
1 minute, 1 minute. Senator Matthew Samuda, 1 minute, please. 1 minute, 1 minute. Saying before, would you just withdraw that last statement that you made?
Withdraw, Mr. President.
Please.
You know, the point to be made, quite simple. You know,
why did you go there? Why didn't you
the fact is, Mr. President, the fact is, President, there are charges of mismanagement, charges of inefficiency, charges of corruption that have bedeviled this country. Unfair share. Being at 68 in the Transparency Index is not what should give us comfort. The amendments here before us strengthen our resolve to fight corruption. The fact is, I have no qualms in saying, nobody has said that. No one has said that. The fact is there are issues to fix, some which are systemic, some which are personal, some which are aligned to parties, and we must fix those, and nobody has said no. But to come in and paint and attack one side, when your side has someone to rewrite Jamaican history, that is not the case. Now, the members on both sides who have spoken have made some recommendations. I think the one that found the greatest favor contractors to take on particular contracts, Mr. President. The fact is, I believe there are either 15 or 16 grade 1 contractors, and you have a situation where you have increased capital works taking place all across. Perhaps another tier now needs to be added by the National Contracts Commission to allow persons or a greater pool of persons to participate in the construction industry, especially a greater pool of locals. And I just want to reiterate my support for the bill and say thank you. No, I'm not driving that route. I know there are some issues there. But all right. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
Senator Scaffery, you don't want the...
No. I thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as a nation, we must never support corruption in any shape or form on any side of the field. The House is a sad day. Because every taxpayer dollar waste could build a better basic school somewhere in Jamaica for those children. Every taxpayer dollar waste could count one. So whether it is this side when in government or that side in government, no. We collectively, all 21 of us in this honorable upper house, must reject corruption in envy. Personally, let the chips fall where they may. There are current issues now. If it's Petrodram, investigate. For Manchester, let the chips fall where they may. So, Mr. President, I said all, because I'm not in any comparative thing. You're sober about it. Right? You must be sober about it. And I'm president. We can't be here for tit for tat.
You can't be much
of this bill that is seeking to do just that. And that's what we must be for. Corruption has hurt Jamaica far too long. On any side of the divide. Private sector. Sometimes we focus on corruption in public sector because it's government and it's easier to assess and to determine. And so on. So we need to look at that. This bill is seeking to enhance that when we implement this bill, it will achieve the objective. And itself doesn't seek to create a bottleneck.
Talk to Matthew. Talk to Matthew.
And doesn't seek to create a bottleneck.
Start it down. I talk about Petrojam corruption.
Senator Brown, Senator Webby, stop interrupting Senator Skeffrey.
So, Mr. President, I was very quiet today. One of my desires, Mr. President. Lam is well okay, man. One of my desires, Mr. President, is that the procurement bill, if we don't have the act, we have the amendment here, doesn't create a level of monopoly in the industry or in the system. Because sometimes, while we go for efficiency, which is important, corruption issues that we need to get rid of, sometimes we shut out some of the ordinary players, yes, who are the good men and women. They are the only ones can benefit. They themselves create a monopoly and create a level of corruption behind the back seat. One of the issues we talk about this bill here today, we must put on the front burner, is the issue of the integrity in the bidding system. Some is not as highly transparent as it ought to be in terms of information sometimes reaching some contractors as to what is to happen. And sometimes persons bid below have these overruns as you move back because it's not sufficient to carry out the project. You get the project, then you start to renegotiate when you have the project. So we have to ensure the system deals with that. Another problem, let's face it, in the public sector, is the constant difference between being the policy maker and directing the policy and the implementing arm in the organization. And we have that overlap. And then sometimes we have the issues. All contracts at a certain sum, every sum, there are rules that determine who should make the decisions. And therefore, every contract should pass through the board, whether the board has a decision or the managing director has that decision based look into is the quality of our boards and the understanding the role. And I want to use this honorable senator to say to board chairmen and directors, anybody forcing you to do something other than what is in the interest of the public and shame them and let the public know. We have a civic duty when we serve on public bodies to protect the integrity of the system and the taxpayers' dollar. That is why we accept to serve in a voluntary notion. So I'm asking efficiency gains at that level. Mr. President, and to you, Minister, another issue is that the monitoring, Senator Brown spoke about how the agency of the state that should evaluate and monitor. But sometimes we get the reports and there are no sanctions. So we get the report from the Contractor General, the Auditor General, and other bodies. They are tabled in Parliament, they are reported, they are debated, and then that's it. The clear breach are known and nothing happens. If you don't, I'm talking about where we are and we need to go as we protect the ordinary citizen, some of them. So we need to look at how we evaluate and monitor the system. Senator, we spoke about, I think, Senator, we spoke about training and more so in technology. But there's another, I want to broaden that context. Just about training to our public servants in terms of the procurement, the law, the guidelines, and while at a particular institution. And it's amazing to know that many of those, like bursars, for example, near that quickly fail with the procurement guidelines. So sometimes out of ignorance, no ill will at that level. in many public bodies. Many persons don't have the concrete knowledge. Exactly. So some don't even know it, don't want to follow it. And when you speak to expenditure at X level, where the principal and below, above that, it must be the board and the 3 signatories and things like that. In some cases, honestly, it was news. Guidelines there, but they don't reach. So how we can reach out to them in some more, in a bulletin format, a summary of the critical issue. Not just the law, but the guidelines properly known, and we have training in our workshop to ensure that those who must deal with procurement issues understand what the law is required as we move forward. So, Mr. President, we support the bill on this side, as we have said before, that anything to bring about efficiency. But I want to warn that I do not want this bill to close out our small contractors. Because of their capital base, are not able to compete with the larger contractors. And what we have in, and it was said, I think by Senator Abraham, that many of the larger contractors, they bid for the contracts, they get them, then they subcontract them. It leads to even poor quality in the construction, where the big players have all the large contracts and then smaller persons. Sometimes you don't even see you don't even know who the contractor is, or you don't even see them on the ground. Is that local encourage these smaller contractors, even some small expenditure of 4 million, 5 million road construction, and get them to ensure deal with it. And finally, the point that I call, this minister spoke about splintering contract, is something we need to look into and warn against. Up into smaller persons just to go against or around the procurement guidelines. And then and after that, you don't get efficiency. So there are many challenges in the system as we seek to roll out this act or the amendment. And we have the courage and the fixity of purpose to always strive for transparency and accountability and the highest integrity. Both sides of the house. If we cannot unite around anything else, if we unite around getting rid of corruption in any... Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Skeffrey. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President.
You need it.
No, I think I should be fine. Thank you. In expressing appreciation to Senator Skeffrey for the tone on which he closed his presentation. But I also want to express thanks to Senator Samuda for ensuring that the record expressed nothing more than the truth. It's a tough discussion to have in this debate, but it really, I have to say, we would do a disservice to Jamaica were we to allow allegations to go unanswered, as we have actually done on many occasions in this House, in this chamber, and being high. But the risk that we have taken, Mr. President, is that we have allowed Hansard to reflect one side of the story and not always the facts. So, Mr. President, I want to express thanks to Senator Samuda as well for making it clear that even Transparency International has recognized that this administration has moved Jamaica up index 2 years in a row by the concerted efforts we have been making to ensure since independence. It would be ridiculous, but we're working on it. And CPI and our score on the work, we do not tolerate corruption. We do not facilitate it, and we want to root it out. The establishment of the integrity, the rationalization of how it is that we deal with those matters, the institutionalization of MOCA, which was just dealt with by this chamber last week, and other efforts focused on efficiency, which is the flip side of corruption. If we can fix systems fundamentally, if we can root out the inefficiencies that allow persons to pay for services to go through in an expeditious manner, if we fix the inefficiencies that make people feel that it is somehow okay to try to get a blind, treating with this economy, and how it is that we're seeking to facilitate growth. This is another side, another path through which this administration expresses and demonstrates its commitment to ensuring that Jamaica grows in a way that is transparent and accountable to its people who elect us in accordance with the Constitution. Mr. President, there were some questions asked today around the operation of the bill. And questions raised as to why it is that, or what it is, Senator Fraser-Baines, and it came out in the debate that the bill is actually the act, the principal act, the Public Procurement Act 2015, that it's fundamentally not yet operationalized. And that is because it has continued. This is the drafting of the regulations. This is the drafting, as I mentioned in my opening, this is the drafting of the manual, of the guidelines, that is necessary in order to implement the act. And it was in the drafting of these documents, guidelines, regulations, manual, that it was discovered that there was dissonance in the language and some fundamental issues that also needed to be addressed. So the regulations, making every effort to table them next week, Tuesday, when the other place sits. But further work is also being done. The handbook has been revised to a user-friendly guide, far away, together with the electronic promulgation or the electronic processes that are being developed as well, which will help with equity and access. One of the things that we have been discussing on both sides in this chamber this morning is the importance of ensuring that or disadvantaged economically and are difficult fundamentally, I think the phrase was just simply recognized, that they have a problem competing with larger players, that there will be a greater effort participated in public procurement would be able to do. There will be revised standard bidding documents. These are also almost complete. There will be training, and there is training and onboarding of procurement entities onto the electronic procurement platform, which will allow, again, for greater access. And establishment of the Public Procurement Commission, the Office of Public Procurement, and the restructuring of specialist procurement units. All of these steps are to be taken in order to, we have said, are absolutely essential for us to improve how it is that we deal with procurement, public procurement in the government. I spoke earlier about the partnership with, so while it is that there was a period of time when some of the background work was still, I think, a bit distant from where we would have wanted it to be, able to implement in an effective and equitable way. So businesses will be able to access information on the electronic procurement platform by way of an approved annual procurement plan, as well as information and access to information which was being discussed is now underway. And the government's electronic procurement platform allows anyone, even now, access to procurement data. Clearly, to participate in the electronic procurement process, you will have to register. That's a different stage of the process. And even now, you can go to jep.gov.jm in order to see what opportunities exist. So we have to say, we have to go JEP, G-O-J-E-P, Government of Jamaica Electronic Procurement Platform. At this point, I think I should just touch on an important point made by Senator Hill when he spoke earlier. Because he spoke about the role of the government in enabling. The government, and this is one of the, understand clearly the distinction between the role of government and the role of the private sector. The government's role is to enable the private sector to be able to function efficiently and to participate in a competitive way in markets and including public procurement. I think Senator Crawford was speaking about support being given to the private sector, but people have to act as well. If you want to compete, you have to seek out information. You can't only sit if you are planning to run a business to you. You can't only wait on government to come to you. Business is business. And we must encourage our people. We must encourage, when we speak about entrepreneurship, that people must have an active sense of what it requires to do business. And part of that is stepping up what you do, finding out the information, and so I think you had called on members of the private sector as well, Senator Hill, and I join you in that call. As we speak about how it is that we enable, I just want to ensure, or rather make it clear, that on the issues of performance that will be developed by the Public Procurement Commission, and this will address the issues that are being felt across the nation in terms of ensuring that we get value for money. For years, for decades, persons have concerned about or asked questions whether government, through all these convoluted procurement processes, we want the of Suppliers Regulations 2018 will also address this, because it's going to speak to not only the matters of equity, which we have been discussing, but it will address the matter of qualification and the tiers which are accessible, or rather which access procurement opportunity. A concern which has been raised in the debate today. Understand, as I've been able to glean, is that the 2016 report should be tabled within the next few weeks, and the 2017 is being drafted. The concern expressed is, however, shared, Senator Brown. So I was heartened reports which taken in based on those on the regulations, and I think just because the issue of equity was raised on more than one occasion by more than one speaker on both sides today, I just want to make the point that there will be a 20% set aside for MSMEs. And one can recognize that MSMEs will be better. Thank you, Mr. President. Micro, small, and medium enterprises, but they're likely to have young participants in the economy, women participants in the economy, and perhaps also persons living with disabilities. So we are targeted at any point in time. But what the bill does is that it creates a framework with this new and appropriate language around special and differentiated treatment. It aligns us, which is important, and it is not, it's not placed or dissonant. Then while we are seeking to compete and also encourage FDIs, then we will be too internally dissonant to be successful. So we will be, Mr. President, ensuring that will be implemented in short order in an equitable way, which will assist with efficiency and allow us, therefore, to tackle corruption fundamentally. I thank you, Mr. President, and ask for second reading of the bill.
Thank you, Minister. The question.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Public Procurement Act, read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill. Thank you. Minister, you had indicated, I think, in your opening that there were some clauses that you were going to have some tweaking to deal with. Would you indicate those to me so I can see if we can take some of the other clauses in?
Thank you, Mr. President. Clause 2, 3, 14, 18, and 24. 3, 14, 18, and 24. Yes.
So, Acting Leader, I'm going to try and see if we can difficulty as we go along. I'll stop, okay? So that I would take clause 1. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Ayes have it. Clause 2, Minister, there is an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. In clause 2, there's more than one amendment. The first is actually not an amendment, it's a printing error. In paragraph A4, let me say it, little a, Roman numeral 4, big A, delete the word sir and replace it with or. And it was actually noted in the Hansard, but was a printing error. So it's not actually an amendment. In paragraph C, Mr. President, under the amendment is to insert next, after the definition of supplier, the following definitions. The first is C, paragraph C. Ultimate effective control has the meaning assigned to it by Section 2 of the Companies Act. So that's ultimate effective control in quotation marks, has the meaning assigned to it by Section 2 of the Companies Act. And secondly, ultimate ownership, again in quotation marks, has the meaning assigned to it by Section 2 of the Companies Act. And the next amendment is in relation to the paragraph and replacing it with the following, simpler this way, in which more than 50% of the equity interest is under the ultimate effective control of, by, comma, a Jamaican. Let me just read that one more time. This is B3 on page 4, in which more than 50% of the equity interest is, yes, Mr. President.
Okay. Can I ask that the amendments to clause 3 be approved? Those in favor, I'm sorry, clause 2 be approved. Those in favor? Against? I put clause 2 as amended. Those in favor?
The next is editorial, Mr. President. It is in paragraph B. So we're on page 5. On paragraph B of clause 3, it's just to insert paragraph I. So after paragraph I, in the
editorial and put clause 3. Those in favor? Against?
13.
Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. Clause 14, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Clause 14 is a mere renumbering the new section 25D1 as section 25D.
Put it to the people. She was, in many ways, a roots person. And it shows that matters not where you come from, you can rise to the highest level. May it please you, sir.
Mr. President, we on this side leadership at a time when such wasn't prevalent, and she served as councillor, senator, and parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Local Government. We commend the sacrifices and also Dr. Mavis Gilmore. I believe that these women, they have blazed a trail for all of us now. Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith, Senator Fraser Binns, and so many other powerful women. And she was known to be forthright, objective, and independent. And she was a resilient woman of character, and independence. May her soul rest in peace.
As a former member of the Senate, I would ask that the members present rise and observe a moment's silence for our departed colleague, Senator Gladys Ellington. May the soul of our colleague Gladys Ellington rest in peace and light perpetual shine upon her. And for that a copy of the Hansard reflecting our tributes be sent to the family. Senator Brown, I ask you to, first of all, thank you for bringing to the attention of the fact that we had recognized her today. Thank you very much. The question is that the Senate be adjourned. Against, the Senate now stands adjourned.